This is Rona Palmer from eMaint Enterprises, and I'd like to welcome you today and thank you for joining us for this month's Best Practices webinar. And I'm kind of pleased today. We have a guest speaker we've never had before, and generally we're inviting our guest speakers come from many of our partner organizations that we work with, but today I have the privilege of having someone, Greg Perry, who actually works at eMaint Enterprises as a CMMS Implementation Specialist. And he's going to be presenting today's topic, which is Begin, the Rest is Easy, and Keys to CMMS Implementation Success. And I'd like to thank Greg for putting this together. And for those of you who don't know Greg, he's had over 12 years experience in providing leadership and maintenance and operational best practices. And he started his career as a clinical engineer for about 8 years as a biomedical technician in the facilities department. He's also was a field engineer for 5 years doing software implementations, and also has done some consulting and some manufacturing reliability initiatives. So we're really glad to have Greg join us in June, and he does many of our implementations, and he took time out of his busy scheduling. We had to do this one in December because the rest of the year Greg's on the road, and I'd like to welcome him today and thank him for putting together. And maybe, Greg, we have a lot of people today who registered, and while they're logging in, can you just take a moment and maybe tell us, Greg, why this topic? What made you think of this title and this topic to present today?
Okay, well, thank you, Rona. CMMS implementation. I remember way back when I was a field engineer, I was eating Chinese. Chinese is my favorite food, and I cracked open a fortune cookie, and it was actually during a very challenging implementation. And I was actually asking myself, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get through this? I mean, there's just so much to it. What do we do? Well, in the fortune cookie was one simple sentence. Begin, the rest is easy. And it made clear to me that there is order to chaos.
Well, that's great. I didn't realize this was inspired by a fortune cookie. That's great. Yeah, I learn something new every day. All right, well, listen, before I turn things over to Greg, one quick minute here, and let me just go through a few things. We've carved out an hour for this. I think Greg's presentation will be about 40 minutes, and then he will stay for the rest of the hour to answer all of your questions. It's a pretty big topic, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions because, we can only scratch the surface here. So we invite you at any time during the presentation to go through and type your questions in the question feature. And Greg and he'll answer as many as he possibly can at the end, and also invite you to continue the dialogue after the presentation. So your phones are on mute, but please type in your questions at any time. And we'll also be recording today's presentation, and we'll share the link with you in the next day or so that you can share it with your colleagues. So without further ado, let me turn things over to Greg.
Well, welcome everybody, and today's topic is CMMS implementation. Begin, the rest is easy. We're going to just go ahead and dive right in, and I believe we've already had a great introduction by Rona in who I am and my background. So we'll simply go past that screen. And right off the bat, what is a CMMS? Well, a CMMS is a computerized maintenance management system. It has evolved over the years to be that of the same enterprise asset management. They're usually one and the same in today's world. But more importantly, what is a CMS? What is it not? Okay, it's not a financial system. Okay, it's not a procurement system, and it's definitely not a magic wand. As we'll find out as we go through this presentation, this isn't that magic bullet. I mean, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a little bit of strategy, and definitely takes a lot of hard work to make a successful CMMS implementation. All right, so the next question is, well, what is the purpose of a CMMS? Well, first and foremost, let's make it a maintenance tool, okay? Then it provides a central storage location for the majority of data and information for your assets, okay? And then it manages and controls your work and materials management or parts usage processes. And of course, finally, it tracks maintenance activity over the life cycle of an asset. But let's go back to what it really is. It is a maintenance tool. In our maintenance and operations world, we have a typical CMMS environment. And here in the screen, we kind of laid it out pictorially in exactly how does that environment look like and how is it laid out with the different key responsibilities and the key different roles. Without having to go through the screen and then explain each one of these different picks, but what you start out with is work request, okay, or PMs, and then they end up with being a historical record, and more importantly, a historical record for analysis. So we have another question. Why an organization needs a CMMS? Well, we've got 3 key points here. 1, helps customers to improve preventive and predictive maintenance, extend the life of their equipment, and achieve a lower total cost of operation. Another key point, reduce equipment downtime and inventory requirements while improving service intervals. And then, of course, organizations are in a position to make more informed decisions and adjustments that optimize maintenance and operations. All right, so here's a topic that's kind of dear to me as I've gained experience over the years with implementing CMMS systems. I usually approach it from the wish, want, needs synergy. Okay, so what I want to talk about here is I want to identify and document immediate needs. Okay, so we need to focus on the needs that drives the want, okay, that feeds the wishes in order to support, of course, continuous improvements. So when you're looking at your implementation of a CMMS system, you really need to be looking at it from a wish, want, need perspective, because I guarantee you that column of the wishes are going to be long, and then the column for the wants are going to be probably just as long, if not a little shorter, and then you probably didn't really pay much attention to the immediate needs. Well, we're going to go forward with the process here and talk about how that want, wish, and needs take play. So why you wish to take the first step? Maintenance wishes. All right, you want to move towards world class. That's pretty obvious. I think that's number one reason why you're using CMMS as a maintenance tool. Such as world class wrench time, you want to acquire that particular percentage, 55 to 65. Most companies actually are between 18 and 33, so there's room for improvement there. Work requested planning, 80% processed in less than 5 days. You want to achieve work scheduled, of course, 80% of man hours applied. And then, of course, work completion, you want to achieve greater than 95%. The CMMS is nothing but just a tool to help you with these world-class achievements. Then let's move on to the maintenance wants. Why you want to take the first step with your CMMS implementation. You want to improve your maintenance performance based on data, obviously. Want to track and manage the maintenance backlog. You want to automate maintenance workflows and processes. You want to track projects and associated maintenance costs. You want to prioritize work and manage resources. And you want to track and control use of maintenance materials. Well, after you've identified your wants, then what does maintenance need? And why you need to take the first step once again. I believe I heard a quote as I've traversed through my career through maintenance and operations. Measure what you treasure. Define your output first. Okay, so let's define what are your maintenance needs. Let's identify them. Are they reduced cost, reduced failures, reduced downtime? Are you looking to increase your work identification? Are you looking to increase your or advance your work planning? More effective work scheduling, more effective work execution, realistic performance analysis, and that basically loops back to data. You need data in order to make realistic performance analysis. All right, Rona, so we've reached our first poll question.
Great. So we're going to go ahead and launch a poll. And what we'd like to do is we kind of want to understand, all of you that are on this session today, what is your most important driver for implementing or seeking to implement a CMMS? Presumably, if you chose to be here, you're in one of those states. So let us know and just type your answers right into the keyboard. And let us know, are you looking to increase overall efficiency, streamline or automate your workflows, maybe increase visibility and accountability for your team, capture maintenance cost, or due to some compliance, regulatory compliance need? So again, maybe all these are needs, but can you just tell us what's your most important driver? All right, and then these answers are anonymous, but we'll just share the aggregate results with the team, so you can each get a feel for the other listeners that are with us today. All right, it looks like we've had about 3/4 of the votes in. Give a few more minutes in case people are deciding. All right, and yeah, all right, we'll close the polls and let me share the results with all of you. So it looks like, Greg, 48%, nearly half, say it's just to increase overall efficiency. 18% say streamline or automate processes. I guess we're all trying to go do more, better, faster. 19% say improving or increasing visibility and accountability of requests. 9% capturing costs, and 6% regulatory compliance. All right, back to you, Greg.
Okay, in that it makes sense to hear the increased overall efficiency, because time is money. Okay, so you definitely want to be more efficient on what you're doing. So you want to accomplish more with less. So a CMMS is a tool for which can accomplish that. Absolutely. All right, so how do we get there? That's another good question. And I've had that asked several times. Greg, how do I get there? How do I begin? Well, I asked the question in return, well, how do you eat an elephant? And I'm sure many of you have heard that before. And, well, I think it's just one toe at a time is how you do it, okay? And so with that cliche, we will then go into the 10 keys to success in a CMMS implementation. And this really is somewhat of, if you follow these 10 keys, I believe you'll find a greater line of success with your CMMS implementation. All right, so the 10 keys to success in a CMMS implementation. All right, these were derived from common industry best practices and key steps. So this isn't reinventing the wheel. This has been out there for a while, but I think being able to bring it all together and explain what each one of these 10 keys are, and that's really the purpose for today's presentation. Begin with an implementation team, and then move to a core team familiarization and workflow process development, and then standard operating procedures, moving into the actual implementation phase, after which you go into the configuration phase, which then leads to more data population and validation phase, training main users, of course, very key and important. You have to define some GoLive strategies, and of course, process auditing. And we're going to talk about each one of these in a little more detail here, starting with the key number 1, implementation team. Implementation team, it's often selected from a cross-functional array of an internal team member or members. They can come from a variety of departments, including, but not limited to, maintenance, operations, or materials management, information technology, planning, purchasing, finance, any other level of management, even outside consultants and software vendors as well. It's often unnecessary to occupy all of each team member's time. It's imperative that you set aside sufficient amount of time and that it's allocated to decide upon planning, implementing, re-implementing your CMMS system. In many cases, members of this team will become your local experts, okay? Though it's not often unnecessary to occupy all of each team member's time, it is imperative that a significant amount of time is allocated to decide upon, and I'm repeating that because it's key. You have to have allocated time with your implementation team to decide upon those key factors: plan, implement, or if you're going to re-implement. All right, so what does an implementation team, what does that composition look like? Well, you would have senior leadership. You would have members from maintenance leaders, your champions, your system administrators or future system administrators, your project leaders, your project managers, your analysts. You'll have your SMEs, your subject matter experts, and you'll have your IT staff members, and of course you can have implementation consultants, all part of that implementation team. So key number 2, core team familiarization. And what are we saying when we say core team familiarization? Well, this is the upfront system overview training of the CMMS system. And I've heard this said time and time again out in industry: you don't know what you don't know. So what you want to do is you want to become more familiar with what the CMMS system can do and what it can't do. Okay, and you want to lay the framework, ensuring system compatibilities are understood, and then the core team should become your site system experts, and they will become your future trainers. So number 2, core team familiarization, understanding what the CMMS system can do, and more importantly, what it cannot do. Key number 3, workflow process development. I cannot emphasize more here on how important this number 3 step is, or number 3 key. It defines how the system will be utilized and in the flow of data to ensure standardization. This is so often overlooked and is such a critical phase. It causes more CMMS implementations to fail because this step is largely gleamed over. It's extremely important that the utilization of the system is seamlessly blended into everyday use. And if processes or required procedures are difficult to follow, then guess what? They're not going to be followed. All right, so it's very important in this number 3 key here that you have your basic workflow processes defined. Work through your work request, your work order management. How is that going to work? Okay, so all the way from the creation of the work order all the way to the completion of the work order and the closeout of the work order. Planned maintenance, your PMs and inspections. Do you have your SOPs together, okay, that help define what your PM strategy are? Okay, inventory management. How does that look and how does that work? And then, of course, purchasing and requisitions. If you're going to use your CMMS system as usually in small cases, you'll be using as a purchasing or requisition. All right, here's a workflow process improvement flow chart, if you will, to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. With business process improvement, you map the current processes accurately. You don't want to take judgment calls here. Have someone who knows how to use flow diagrams, at the minimum. Map the process. You identify standard operating procedures that may or not be part of the process. And if your organization uses any Lean, Six Sigma, or any other process improvement methodology, this is a good time to start to apply it. Go through the processes on paper or on screen with the team and find and eliminate inefficiencies. And then your CMMSs have implied business logic. Take advantage of it. Okay, so with your current business process will lend to standard operating procedures, lends to process improvement, and then of course helps develop your CMMS workflows, which then also helps define your new business process. Key number 4, standard operating procedures. This is the documenting phase. It captures all definitions developed during the implementation phase. Here, it's very, and if you're thinking in practical terms, your assets are items that are keeping track of the work performed against. All right, then makes pretty much better business sense. You can keep track of the work in varying degrees of detail. You want to group your assets together in asset types. Right? What is it? Examples: buildings, air handling units, pickup trucks, pumps, generators. What have you. Decide if there are any groups of assets that you want to track as a single asset item, like fire extinguishers, as an example. Determine your asset hierarchies. These are components of an asset that are also defined as an asset, which, such as a motor and air handling unit, or monitoring or controlling devices attached to a production machine. Okay, and then you want to start defining your locations. Locations are physical, logical placement of your assets. Locations are usually hierarchical as well, but they're not assets themselves. You should also define your location hierarchy as part of your asset definitions. Then you move into parts and spare parts and components of an asset that are not defined as an asset themselves. Where do you draw the line? Defining, well, what's the difference between a part and what's the difference between an asset? And usually that you use that the question, do you PM the part? Okay, well, if you're providing maintenance to it, then it's a part. You can track the parts all the way down to the nuts and bolts, literally, or you should consider what level of tracking makes business sense. Okay, you also should be looking at defining your workflow procedures. You also want to look at defining, more importantly, who's responsible along the step from each one of those workflow procedures. Where's the buck stop? Where does it start and where does it end, and who's responsible for it? You want to also draw together your defining of your maintenance coding, so that your maintenance coding makes sense. You're talking about your problem codes, your cause codes, your items codes, your failure codes. Do you have a well-defined listing of these particular maintenance coding items? And here's a screenshot of just defining assets and giving you a better idea of what a hierarchy would look like, especially with an asset. You have your defining fields for locations. You have a location/asset. Is a room an asset? Is it also a location? Then you'll have defined what your assets are, and then of course you would have defined where is that demarcation point between where an asset becomes a part. All of these things need to be defined and need to be clearly outlined before you even really try to begin the implementation of a new CMMS implementation. A lot of times, like I said, and I'll repeat it again, this is the steps, or these are the steps where failures occur for CMMS implementations because these SOPs were not clearly defined. So key number 5, this is the implementation. Right? So within the implementation, this is where you want to go after your low-hanging fruit first. Okay? Define your initial approach. You're not going to be able to do everything up front, right here, right now. You're just not going to be able to do it. So you need to prioritize and look at what is it you're going to initially implement. Let's look at the low-hanging fruit first. Let's go after some quick wins, and let's gain some confidence along the way. Let's move into defining phase to develop all pertinent data standards and ensure consistent data collection. Let's make sure we're getting the data we need and only the data we need. I think in another slide I'll mention where ancillary data, okay, can come later. Okay, those are more of the asset attributes and things of that nature. But let's define and let's get the pertinent data first, and let's define those standards. Let's leverage the experience of an experienced CMMS implementer for guidance. Obviously, again, this kind of goes back to you don't know what you don't know. So raise your hand, ask for help. And also defining an initial implementation timeline. Very important. And this will hark back to the project management aspect of a CMMS implementation. But you got to have an initial implementation timeline because you got to be able to gauge, where are you, where are you going, and what's next. Now, number 6 key, configuration. All right. Now, you've got all of your SOPs derived, okay, and you've got your data and identified. And now it's time to start setting the system up. All right, this is where you start setting up your forms, fields, drop-downs, table data. And I guess this is a kind of the fun stage, if you will, of an implementation. This is where you're actually starting to make the rubber meet the road, so to speak. You're actually going to start seeing it do something, okay? But while you're in the configuration stage, you need to keep one thing in mind. And you got to understand users of a system versus users of the data. And of course, the purpose with that statement is to ensure data entry consistency with established data standards. All right, so you spend all this time getting your CMMS data management SOPs in order, in your equipment management plan SOPs together, and that helps to define what is it you're going to be using the CMMS tool for to help you with. But if you do not set the system up to where it's intuitive and easy to use, then you're going to poison the data that you're collecting, because it's human nature. If it's too difficult, we're going to go the path of least resistance, and we're just going to go where it's not too difficult. So you got to keep that in mind during the configuration stage. Number 7, data population and validation. Okay, data about your assets. You know, it's critical for the success of your CMMS implementation, but only if you have the right amount of good quality data. And of course, I'm harking back to that again. It's all about the data. You know, all data that goes into your system needs to be maintained. And more importantly, all maintained data needs to go into your system. I have seen some systems that, or some organizations that I've interacted with where I'll ask, okay, is this all your data? Well, this is all the data that, you know, that we've got in the CMMS, but we actually track data elsewhere in spreadsheets. And the first question I ask is, well, why is that? Why is that data not in the CMMS? So we really need to bring it into one roof, okay? And of course, conduct a thorough testing of the established processes and procedures developed to support the maintenance function. Again, you know, you've gone through the stage of getting your SOPs, you've gone through the stage of data collection, you get your data in, well, and you've gone through the stage of your config, and now you're ready to conduct testing. All right, you know, is it really support the maintenance function? And of course, you see from the pictorial here, garbage in does equal garbage out, so we want to guard against that. All right, step 7, of course, data population validation, preparing data for CMMS. Some more to speak about here. Determine which data elements or core you need about your assets in CMMS to support the business process that you defined earlier. And I believe I alluded to this slide earlier. I said determine where these data elements are currently stored, and then attribute data is to follow. All right, so let's look at the core data first during your initial implementation. All right, we can go back and do data collection as a separate phase or a separate implementation, if you will, and gather the attribute data. Okay, clean up data before importing the data into a new system. I think that only makes common sense as well. Importing data includes the population of system data used such as equipment lists, equipment histories, PMs, employee information, vendor, supplier lists, and materials. Okay, so key number 8, training main users. Okay, you know, some organizations like to use the train-the-trainer approach in order to reduce, you know, vendor training costs. But careful consideration, I do want to make a note, careful consideration should be given when using this approach, since the success of the implementation depends greatly on how proficient your users are with the CMMS. The persons responsible for delivering internal training is the most critical component, okay? And I can't emphasize that the most. And I'll say that again, the person or persons responsible for delivering internal training is the most critical component of this approach. Okay, so your internal trainer needs to be or become proficient with the new CMMS at a higher level than required for end users. And your internal trainer needs to possess soft skills, of course, and communications and organization that allows him or her to be an effective trainer. You know, you do have different training options if you can leverage those. Online training, of course, being user gain access to training materials, that are based off of live web-based training over the internet or pre-recorded training material. And most importantly, I think, is on-site training. Training professionals can be sent to your locations, and they can provide face-to-face training sessions with your team. I think this affords the users the opportunity to ask direct questions from the expert, and they also there's something to be said about the connectivity there. Sometimes that light bulb goes off quicker when you have the on-site training opportunity. But I think the key message here, and for this presentation though, is understanding training. Training. It's very important. Very important. Don't make the mistake of thinking, oh, well, the software is intuitive and everybody will learn it at their own pace and they'll be able to pick up quickly on it. I would not discount that at all. Training is a very key element. All right, so you've established your training needs, and so now let's talk about the GoLive strategy. With the GoLive strategy, it will encompass support and coaching. It can be provided by your implementation team or your CMMS implementation consultant to ensure workflows, processes, and system utilizations are performed properly. It may encompass many soft go-lives in regards to certain areas of use within the CMMS system. And you will never, and this is something to stress too, you will never be fully implemented with your CMMS system. Okay, you will encounter several soft go-lives and equate those to implementation milestones, if you will. Okay, and of course it's continuous and ongoing. You'll never be 100% fully implemented. But I think if you try to break it down into many soft go-live instances, it helps to soften that initial blow that you feel in trying to get online, to get up and going. Okay, but if you can logically try to phase that in, I think you'll find that you've got better acceptance. Okay, from an end user's perspective, and you're able to flush out easier smaller problems rather than going all in all at one time, and now all of a sudden you're going to flush out larger problems. Okay, so it does soften that blow. Some GoLive strategy key considerations here. Well, why would I go with a soft GoLive? Okay, well, you may have a situation where you have multiple locations. Okay. And you might have, where you have multiple locations, you might want to pilot a program at one of the locations first before you deploy it out. You may have a situation where data gathering or population projects are needed. Maybe you're starting from scratch. Maybe you're not going to convert data. Maybe you don't trust the data that you've got, and you actually want to go through a data gathering process. Okay, and get fresh, new, clean data. Well, that could be a phase or it could be a soft go live, at the conclusion of such a data gathering event. Also with data gathering, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to start and end before you can go live with that or soft go live. You might actually can be going soft go lives all along the way. Okay. Integration, you may be looking to integrate and the new CMMS system with other ERP systems or any other type of integration you may be looking for. Okay, so that can be considered as a project as well and phased in. Licensing issues, you might be making the jump from one CMMS system to another, and you have a licensing issue that is the reason why you want to do a soft go live. Pilot program we spoke about, and of course you may have some technology or hardware hurdles that you need to overcome. Say you are looking to go mobile, okay, and you want to go paperless. Well, that's great, but there's a lot of work and consideration that has to be made into selecting the right mobile devices. And of course, you have Wi-Fi environment. Do you have Wi-Fi? Do you have cellular? And all these questions have to be answered, and then of course they have to be piloted as well, and they have to go through a testing phase. So all those can be soft go lives. And of course, number 10, very key as well, process auditing. And when we talk about process auditing, we are alluding to what your defined audit or something of that nature to ensure consistent data standards, of course, and to make sure they're followed. and that those workflows and process improvement opportunities are identified. And it's all about continuous improvement. You want to keep the momentum going year over year. Using data to drive decisions, very important that you had clean data and good data to begin with so that the key 10 process auditing makes sense. Process auditing also will give you the ability to start understanding cause of failures. You can define your key metrics, okay? Establish a review process and team, CMMS user group responsible for SOPs. Again, establish a review process and team, gives them an opportunity to look at the established processes and SOPs and everything that you've got already defined. Do they need to be tweaked? Can they be changed? Is there room for improvement there as well? It's continuous improvement mode. And of course, establish immediately after you go live to ensure bad habits aren't followed out of the gate. And that's very key and that's very important. So the whole process auditing is just a continuous loop, okay? And I think the audience can relate to something such as Deming's Will. It's just a continuous loop of continuous improvement. Again, you're using the CMMS as a tool to facilitate that. All right, so just want to share with you just a little snippet here of a CMMS success story that I can share with you. A corporation, Centus, out there actually rolled out eMaint with over 160 production facilities, and then there's some key takeaways here from the understanding of how they accomplished what they did. They started out with a centralized database. It facilitated faster implementation of company-wide changes and standardized procedures. They tracked completion and compliance of PMs, safety, quality, environmental at a plant and regional level, and established a baseline reliability quality requirement for condition of equipment through standards. Now, it was a bit intimidating at first when they made their implementation jump. From the magnitude of the project ahead, full implementation of 150 plus production facilities. So Centus quickly reminded themselves, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, and I believe that begin the rest is easy is synonymous with that very closely, and they focused on the task in front of them as their rollout progressed. So they garnered understanding and they prioritized what was needed. In their case, was safety first. And so they went after their safety needs first in their implementation, and they helped Centus to methodically initiate and initially implement fully in a course of a 6-month period. It was very astounding. So what were the drivers of these dramatic results? Of course, it was revenue and safety, okay, and reliability. So as a result, revenue increased 20%, maintenance cost and capital cost on equipment replacement decreased. And so before Centus implemented eMaint CMMS, they had a production culture and not a reliability culture. So they were able to turn that completely around. Okay, so I just wanted to share that little success story there with one of our customers with you, and try to emphasize, how did they eat their elephant? Well, they did it systematically, methodically, and they did it one toe at a time. All right, Rona, we have our poll question, our last poll question.
Okay, so I just went ahead and launched the poll, and what Greg is asking is, where are you in your journey to reliability and operational excellence? And if you can just please put your responses, if you just type them right into your keyboard. A, you've recognized the need to change the culture, but you haven't yet started down any sort of initiative. B, an initiative is launched, but you're still in the process of refining it and looking for some tools. Or maybe C, you have a system in place, but you're planning to re-implement a reliability initiative. Sometimes these things languish, or there's been turnover perhaps. Or is it D, the initiative was successful and you're in the phase that Greg described in slide 10 of your auditing and in the continuous improvement phase. So again, we just kind of want to know, we have a big audience here today, and let us know where you are in your journey. All right, we have about 70% of the answers in. While you're voting, I did want to say that we've had several people ask to get copies of the slides, and at the end of the session after the Q&A, there'll be a survey. Also, Greg is going to give you an email address as well, and if you just request a copy of the presentation, we'll be happy to send you a PDF of the slides, because I know there's a lot of material here to refer back to. And also, we are recording this, and we'll share the recording. All right, well, it looks like the votes are in, so let me go ahead and share the results. And Greg, it looks like, it's interesting, we have a third and a third. About 36%, or just over a third, are in reactive mode, but they've really recognized the need to change their culture. Another 36%, or another third of our audience, says they've launched an initiative but are looking for some better tools or some better maybe forks and knives to eat that elephant toe. And C, 16% said C. They have a CMMS in place, but they're planning to re-implement a reliability initiative. And D, 12%. They have an initiative that's been successful, and they're on the road to continuous improvement, always looking for ways to improve. All right, so let me hide those results and turn it back to you, Greg.
Okay, well, that was interesting. So I would say it was split between recognize the need to change the culture from reactive. Obviously, and I think the 33% of our audience recognize that definitely need a maintenance tool to make that happen. Okay, and I guess the next question then is, well, how do we do that? And then we had the 33% also initiative, or they have initiated and launched, and they're just seeking for a better tool to manage. So I think they speak to each other. Okay, well, I thank you for attending the presentation, and there's a email address here. If you have any further questions or any needs, please send out the email to services@emaint.com with any questions, and we'll be glad to offer any reply and service we can.
Great. Well, I think we're ready now to open it up to Q&A. And again, we've asked, Greg has agreed to stay through the end of the hour, so please feel free to type your questions in. And several have come in during the presentation, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. And one, early on, Greg, in your introduction, you alluded to wrench time, and when you were discussing world-class maintenance operations. Can you define for our audience your definition of wrench time?
Oh, wrench time. You want your maintenance guys out there doing assigned work, and you want wrench time. You want reduced windshield time. You don't want your guys out there trying to find parts, trying to find the materials they need, trying to identify where something is, trying to locate the asset, trying to find the asset, where is it at, trying to identify who put in the request or what's the problem. So you want to use your CMMS system to the best of its ability to help identify proactively, okay, all those key elements that I just spoke of, and so that they can have more time turning the wrench, more time fixing the equipment, more time actually out there doing what they need to be doing from a maintenance perspective. And that's really what we're alluding to with wrench time.
All right. Excellent. Thanks for defining that. Let's see. We have someone here as a maintenance supervisor at a high school, and they're asking, when you're starting to implement a daily use of a program like eMaint or perhaps any CMMS, can they use only parts of the program that are pertinent, or do you need to implement everything at once? Can you speak to that?
Very good question. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that harks back to understanding the whole soft GoLive concept. You definitely could include just phasing in usage of the CMMS system. You don't have to go all out. If you don't have to, don't. We can speak from experience here at eMaint. We have several of our customers that do that. They choose to roll out, well, we're going to do work orders, and then we're going to move from work orders, and then we're going to define our PMs and our PM strategies and our schedules, and then we're going to move into the parts, and then we're going to move from there. Let's go back into, let's start using it as a purchase order module. All right, so they will definitely start out not using every aspect of the system, but logically and methodically rolling it out with soft go-lives and making these little milestones of implementation. So definitely you don't have to utilize the whole A to Z of a CMMS system. But I do want to speak to, though, you don't want to find yourself in the class where you're only using 10% of the whole CMMS capability. Try to, as part of the continuous improvement, try to identify areas where you can start using the system more and getting more where the system can do more for you. Okay, so, but at first, small steps. I recommend that if you are implementing first.
Yes, thanks. That's sage advice. And many of the questions that we're getting, I would just like to let our listeners know, are very specific questions. And since we have a large group here, we're going to address first the ones that are pertinent to the whole group. But I do promise after, if you type in any question we haven't answered, we'll make sure you get a response, even if it is after the presentation. And someone is asking about how long is an average full implementation of a CMMS? And maybe, Greg, you can give a couple of different examples.
Wow. Yeah. How long is a full implementation? Well, that has a lot to do with the implementation team, your implementation core familiarization, how well you put together your SOPs. Do you have everything needed so that you can go faster, longer, stronger right out of the gate? And I think we would want to caution and not say that the goal is try to get it all done in record time. But it's variable, and it's hard to answer that question because you've got some organizations I know have taken 2 to 3 years to be fully implemented. Some organizations have taken longer than that, and some have taken probably 1 full year at best case. But when you say fully implemented, that again, that's chasing that rainbow. You're never going to get there. You may think that you're there, but there's always going to be something else you can do with your CMMS system. There's always going to be some other way to manage and use it as a maintenance tool, as a management tool. So, but to be fully implemented, yeah, I would probably, it depends. It really is dependable.
It's very, very true. And we have a question here. How would you approach the implementation of a CMMS into a storeroom or parts room? And is the process really any different from what you described?
No, it's not actually. You want to implement your parts the same as you would implement your assets. You're going to be identifying nomenclatures for standard nomenclature for your part numbering, for your part description. You're going to have locationing set up in the storeroom, the same as you have your locationing for your assets. So in many senses, the storeroom setup is the same template, if you will, that you would use to do your assets and implement your assets. There's really hardly any differences in that respect. But that's a good question, very good question.
We have another listener that maybe you can talk to this, saying, is it better to have one central database versus multiple data sets when you have multiple locations and you're using it in multiple locations? And I know we, in the Cintas case, there's an example of people using individual data sets and rolling them together, but maybe you can paint a couple different scenarios of when you're in a multi-location environment. What are your options in choosing a CMMS?
Yeah, you definitely want to look at the capabilities of the CMMS. Are they able to consolidate accounts? in that respect. And it's irregardless of the technology you're using for the database structure. Some database structures out there do allow shared segments, if you will, and some others do. But can they consolidate? In other words, can you roll up out of your individual sites into one master site to do your master KPIs, your master dashboarding, your master reporting, or can you use it to push out tasks and PMs and to push out standardized data? So yeah, I would not say that there's an advantage of one over the other. I think they both have great advantages, and they all have pros and cons. But I think the key there is to understand, can the CMMS system consolidate, and can they offer that type of consolidation or multi-site capabilities? And if they can, good.
Yes, and we did have another question, too, that just came in as far as training, and I'm sorry, we're probably not going to get to all of these. We'll promise we'll follow up with you after, but they're coming in fast and furiously. Since you did speak to training, and for at least our eMaint listeners out there, they asked if there's, in addition to on-site training, are there also larger conferences for eMaint training throughout the year? And I did want to say that, yes, we have boot camp trainings that happen. Next year they'll be happening just about every month, as well as people that can come on site, and then twice a year we have user conferences. So yes, we have a lot of training options, and we'll be happy to follow up with you after the webinar. Here's another question from a listener who said, my company has a purchase order system, and it said, is there a way to add to interface purchasing requests to create into the work order and inventory system?
Oh, absolutely, and that falls up underneath. Yep, absolutely. That speaks to a soft GoLive tactic as well. Yeah, you can implement ERP systems. Absolutely, and I would recommend that you keep the CMMS system within the CMMS realm. Okay, and if we hark back to one of the first screens when we first started, what is a CMMS not? Well, it's not a procurement system. Okay, so let's leave your purchasing and your procurement systems and your ERP systems to do what they do best. Okay, and let's implement an integration between the two so that you have the best of both worlds. If you can say that very clearly, best of both worlds with the CMMS. Let the CMMS do what it does best. Let the ERP do what it does best, and then marry the two together, and then you really have a win-win situation.
Absolutely. Someone is asking us that when you are evaluating CMMS systems, what are the advantages of a cloud-based or disadvantages of a cloud-based versus an in-house program? Can you speak to that briefly?
Yeah, okay. So you want to know the difference between a web-based or cloud-based versus a enterprise type of or LAN type of system.
Right. When you might use, when do you want to apply each?
When you want to apply each, okay. Well, they both have great pros, and of course they both have some cons. But to go to cloud-based, I think, would be a little more preferred, and only because that's less burden on your IT group. Okay, so supposing you don't have an IT group, well, you leverage the expertise in that realm with going to a cloud-based type environment. Even if you do have an internal IT group, maybe they're looking for great opportunities that can lessen their footprint, their burden. Going to a cloud base will help them with that as well. Everything that can be achieved in a LAN can be achieved in the cloud. They're really the barriers over with the advent of our technology today, and it has really been broken down to the point where it's really either or. But I think there's a distinct advantage to going in the cloud, personally, simply because of the burden and that's lessened on an organization. Yeah,
that seems to be the way even enterprises are moving these days. Let's see. One listener said they'd like to immediately implement the work order CMMS process, and they'll have a team together in a couple of weeks. But in regards to the SOP or the procedures manual, can that take a second-tier soft implementation launch or goal? Can you just clarify, because you did talk about the importance of SOPs and procedures. Do you recommend that happens before the work order procedure is in place or not?
Oh, it definitely has to happen before. With your equipment management plan, you're going to identify certain key things like time-defined intervals. Well, that harks to well, if you want to measure work order completions, and especially in a timely manner, are we executing work timely? Are we scheduling work timely? Are we completing the work timely? Well, what are you measuring against? If you don't have time-defined intervals, then how can you do that? Your equipment management plan, that particular portion of the SOP will define what that is. So that's a good example. Again, maintenance codes. Well, do you have clearly defined problem codes, cause codes, item codes, failure codes? Do you have work class codes defined? Exactly what is it that you're trying to measure? Okay, define your output. That defines what input's going to be put in, and the SOP and being able to have your CMMS management SOP that outlines how each of the CMMS work order modules and asset modules and part modules and then contacts and all these other different key aspects of a CMMS system that make it as a whole system to work. Who's creating the work order? Who updates the work order? Who assigns the work order? Who approves the work order? Who takes responsibility of the work order? Who completes the work order? Who's putting the maintenance codes that you've defined onto the work order? How are you collecting the data? Okay, so with a CMMS management SOP, you're identifying these key roles and what they are and how they interact with getting the work order from birth to closure and to becoming a historical record, and from the asset when it's first put in to when the asset's first taken out. So you've got commission, decommission. Who's taking ownership of the PM task and the PM schedules and the job plans and all the other key aspects that go into the CMMS system. And also, who is the custodian of the parts? Okay, so getting all of these workflows defined and understanding who is responsible, it makes the implementation so much easier, and it gives it clarity, and that's really important. And of course, equipment management plans as well. You got to have that. That defines your PM procedures, and it defines your what are you doing and why are you doing it and how often with the periodicities, and contingency plans, and what do you. It really paints the landscape. It really gives you a great foundation to work off of in order for you to get the CMMS tool to work for you.
Well, thanks for that, Greg. And oh my gosh, there are just so many questions that we apologize that we're out of time, but I do promise that within the next few days we'll get answers to all of your questions. And in addition, I'd like to just thank Greg for putting this together and taking time out of his busy schedule of going all over the world doing this to share some of his insights with you today. And I'd like to thank everybody out there taking time out of their busy day to join the webinar. We do promise we'll follow up with all of your specific questions in the next few days. And again, at the end there'll be a brief survey, and we'd really invite you to please indicate if you'd like a copy of the slides. We will send that to you. We'll send everybody here a link to the recording, and we'll get to all your questions. We'd also like to know if there are additional topics that are really of value to you. Let us know what they might be, and we'll get people such as Greg or other partners to come and share, other experts to share that information. So thanks so much for joining us, and this is Rona and Greg from eMaint, and we'll see you next time.